My name is Frank, and I just turned 62. I spent my entire life sacrificing for my son, believing that love and hard work would someday be recognized. But on the night of my birthday, as the candles flickered on a cake, I paid for my own son, raised a glass, and called my life useless in front of a room full of strangers. He didn't know I was planning to give him a $2 million house that evening. I sat there humiliated, every year of sacrifice cutting deeper than the last. But that moment wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. I decided right then that if Trevor and his cold-hearted wife Lindsay wanted to treat me like I was nothing, they'd have to learn just how wrong they were. Before I begin this story, let me ask, where are you watching from and how old are you? Subscribe to Family Betrayal Unmasked for more quiet justice like this. I should have known something was wrong when Trevor stood up with that smug look on his face. The dining room fell quiet as he raised his wine glass and smiled, that practiced smile of his, the one he used when he wanted to seem charming, but was about to say something cruel. "To my father," he said, pausing for dramatic effect. "A man who spent 62 years doing absolutely nothing useful." A few people laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laughter you wanted to hear. It was nervous tight. Then came the silence, the kind that makes your ears ring. Every head turned toward me. I didn't flinch. I wouldn't give him that. I simply stared back, my grip tightening around the base of my wine glass until my knuckles whitened. Trevor leaned back in his chair, clearly proud of himself, like a man who just dropped the mic and expected applause. His tie was loosened, his posture cocky, like he'd already won. Sitting next to him, Lindsay didn't even try to hide her amusement. Her diamond earrings sparkled beneath the chandelier, but her smirk sparkled even more. She sipped her wine slowly, like she was enjoying a private joke. And I guess she was at my expense. I looked around the room. It wasn't filled with my friends. Most of the guests were Trevor's business associates, men in their 40s, who barely acknowledged me, and a few neighbors I hadn't seen in years. I recognized them, but it felt like they no longer recognized me. In that moment, I was a ghost at my own celebration. The cake sat at the center of the table, a cheerful, happy 62nd written across its top in bright blue icing. No one had touched it. That cake felt like a lie, like a cruel joke wrapped in sugar and candles. My voice came low, steady. "You done?" I asked him. I didn't yell. I didn't rise to meet his insult with another. I just looked him in the eye. He chuckled, sharp and bitter. "Done, I'm just getting started, Dad. You sit there like some noble martyr, but what have you actually done with your life, this?" He gestured around the restaurant, a half-eaten cake, and a bunch of people who barely care you exist. "You've always been a nobody." His words were like knives. Not because they surprised me, but because they came from the mouth of the very boy I had once sold my car to send to college. I stayed seated. I stayed still. But something inside me shifted, something final. I wasn't sure what yet, but I knew I would never forget this moment. He thought he'd humiliated me. What he didn't realize was that he'd just freed me. Before we move on, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been betrayed by your own child? If so, how did you handle it? Let me know in the comments. I looked down at my glass, the deep red of the wine catching the light, as if it too had paused to hear what I would say next. The room was still so quiet that I could hear the faint clink of a fork dropping at the next table. My heart was pounding, not from embarrassment, but from something colder, sharper clarity. I cleared my throat and lifted my gaze not to Trevor, but to everyone else. "I was going to give you something tonight," I said calmly. My voice didn't shake. If anything, it felt steadier than it had in years. Something big. A house. Paid in full. $2 million. Yours. The words dropped into the silence like stones into water. A woman gasped. Someone set their drink down too hard. Trevor froze mid-sip, the wine glass halfway to his lips. Lindsay blinked, her expression tightening. I turned my gaze directly to him then. But not anymore, I said. Forget it. That was all. Nothing dramatic, just final, like a door closing. The shock on his face wasn't anger. At first it was confusion, like he couldn't compute that I might have something he didn't know about, something he wasn't already entitled to. Then came the fury. You're lying, he spat, slamming his hand against the table. Wine splashed from his glass, staining the white cloth like a wound. You house, you're too cheap to buy yourself a decent pair of shoes. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He could see it in my eyes. I let him see it, the truth, the pain, the years I'd spent building, quietly sacrificing, while he and Lindsay mocked me for being old-fashioned and behind the times. I saw the exact moment it hit him. His jaw tightened, his hands clenched. Then he stood, knocking his chair back so hard it nearly toppled. You're pathetic, Dad, he shouted loud enough to turn every head in the restaurant, always playing the victim. I'm done with you. Lindsay rose too, her expression shifting from shock to disdain in a blink. She took his arm, her voice like ice. Let's go, Trev. He's not worth it. She shot me one last look, cold and dismissive, the kind that said she saw nothing but a weak, bitter man. They stormed out together, the sound of Trevor's shoes squeaking on the floor like the final punctuation on a broken sentence. The door slammed behind them. The sound was sharp, defining. The guests sat in uncomfortable silence. No one met my eyes. Even the waiter didn't know what to do, hovering like a shadow, unsure where to land. I looked at the ruined table, crumpled napkins, smeared plates, and that untouched cake still smiling in blue icing. I stood, pulled out my wallet, and paid the bill with a steady hand. Then I walked out into the night without a word. But inside me, a switch had flipped. Have you ever reached a point in your life where silence speaks louder than any revenge? If you have, I want to hear about it. Tell me below. I didn't go home that night. I walked, past closed shops, shuttered windows, and streetlights casting long shadows on empty sidewalks. The cool air sharpened my thoughts. My shoes scuffed against the pavement, a quiet rhythm that matched the tick of time I could almost hear in my bones. Trevor's words played over and over in my mind, useless, nobody, pathetic. Not once did he flinch saying them. Not once did he hesitate. That was the part that stuck with me. He meant every word. And Lindsay, her silence was even louder. She didn't defend me, didn't blink when he cut into me. She smiled like the whole thing amused her. I kept walking. At some point, I found myself outside the old neighborhood library. It was closed, of course, but the sight of it, unchanged, dependable, pulled me in. I sat on the bench out front and stared up at the sign. For a long time, I did nothing. Then I pulled out my phone and opened my email just to check if I existed to anyone that night. Nothing. No apologies. No follow-up from Trevor. Not even a single message from any of the people who'd sat and watched the humiliation unfold. I was invisible. And that wasn't new. What was new was how much peace that gave me. When I finally returned home, the house felt different. Not lonely, not sad. Just still. I turned on the lamp in the living room, and it flickered like it always did when the wind rattled the windows. I sat on the couch and pulled the old leather-bound family album from the bookshelf. I hadn't looked at it in years. The leather was soft, worn around the edges. I opened to the first page. There we were, me, Ellen, and little Trevor. A picnic at Lake Geneva. Trevor's tiny hand held a red balloon, his smile bright enough to light a city block. I reached out and touched the photo. My thumb brushed the edge of the picture, smudging a corner. That boy, that moment, that was the last time I remember him being mine. I turned the pages slowly. Each one carried its own sacrifice. There was Trevor's high school graduation. I worked 2 jobs to pay his tuition, barely slept, skipped every vacation. But look at that grin, cocky, proud, promising the world. Next, a photo of him at his college dorm, standing in front of a used futon I'd bought him after selling my old Honda. I remembered the ache in my chest as I watched that car drive away, knowing I couldn't afford to keep it and pay his tuition. He hugged me that night, said, "I'll make you proud, Dad. I'll pay you back." I had believed him. God, I had believed him. I closed the album and sat in silence, the kind that wraps around you like a thick coat. I'd given him everything I had, and in return, he called me nothing. But maybe, just maybe, it was time I stopped waiting for him to be someone he'd never been. Have you ever realized too late that someone you love was never who you thought they were? Let me know, because that night I did. The house felt colder than usual as I made my way to the study. The hardwood floor creaked under my steps, the same way it had for years. But tonight, it felt like the floor was reminding me of everything I'd let slide. I sat down at my desk, the same one where I used to balance budgets and prepare presentations long after retirement. The surface was clean, just my old laptop and a notepad resting there waiting. I hadn't touched that laptop in months. Retirement had stripped me of the daily habit of checking figures, scanning deals, and spotting risks. But now something in me stirred the part of me that used to notice cracks before things collapsed. I opened the laptop. The blue light hit my face harsh and unkind, but I didn't blink. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I didn't know what I was searching for, not exactly. But I knew where I had to start. I typed his name, Trevor Harland. Then I hit search. A string of articles popped up, most filled with buzzwords, startup lingo, photos of him grinning next to investors. But buried beneath the gloss, I found the rot. One headline caught my eye: local entrepreneur under scrutiny for unpaid debts. I leaned in. The company, his latest fintech miracle, was bleeding cash. Investors were pulling out. Rumors of shady loans, misreported numbers, and silent partners fleeing the sinking ship. I sat back, a grim smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. So the golden boy wasn't untouchable after all. I scrolled further, piecing together the mess he'd created. I remembered last year him bragging over dinner about a bulletproof deal. I'd asked a few questions: cash flow, burn rate, risk exposure. He'd waved me off with a laugh and told me to stick to old man spreadsheets. I had. Until now. I picked up my phone and called Jack, an old friend. Used to be my counterpart at another firm. We'd played chess every Sunday until his knees gave out and mine lost interest in walking. He picked up on the second ring. "Frank, you all right? It's late." "I need a favor," I said. "Trevor's business. I want the real story, no PR fluff." Quietly. He was silent for a beat. Then he chuckled. "Kid's been dancing with fire, huh?" "All right. I've heard whispers. Give me a day." "He's not my kid anymore," I said without thinking. Jack didn't respond to that. He didn't have to. We both knew what I meant. I hung up and pulled my notepad closer. Trevor debt, bad loans, investor panic. I scribbled in block letters. Then a new column: Lindsay, social media, brand, sponsors. It was all a house of cards. One false move, and it'd collapse. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was writing justice. Quiet, clean, and precise. I wasn't some bitter old man out for drama. I was a man who had been underestimated for too long. And now I was wide awake. Have you ever reached the point where you stop making excuses for the people you love? When did it happen for you? The next morning I woke up before the sun, not out of habit, but because my mind refused to rest. The notepad from the night before still sat on the desk, my scribbled words, staring back at me like a challenge. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, bitter and hot, and sat down in the stillness of my study. My laptop was already open screen, glowing faintly, waiting for me to keep going. I wasn't angry anymore. That stage had passed. Now I was focused, clear, deliberate. I searched deeper into Trevor's business records, digging into public filings, court notices, obscure trade journals. Each document painted the same picture: over-leveraged, overconfident, and underprepared. It wasn't just bad luck. It was arrogance. And I had funded that arrogance more times than I could count. I found a buried article about a predatory loan he'd taken to keep the company afloat, ridiculous terms, the kind that crush you if you miss a payment. He was already behind. The lender, shady, offshore, unforgiving. I remembered warning him about partners like that. He'd scoffed and called me out of touch. But here we were. I grabbed my phone again and called Jack. He answered on the first ring. Frank. Got something? I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Tell me about Trevor's offshore loan, I said. The one he took last spring. I know there's more. Jack sighed. You're digging deep, old friend. Word is he's missed several payments. They're circling. And there's talk of an ethics probe. Something about manipulated numbers on a pitch deck. Not good. He paused. You sure you want to go down this road? I'm already on it, I said. After the call, I printed copies of the most damaging documents and fed them into a slim manila folder. Then I turned to Lindsay. Her social media presence was polished, curated fake. Brunches, designer bags, motivational quotes, flawless selfies. But the comments told a different story, brands pulling back rumors of inflated follower counts, staged sponsorships. I didn't need much. Just one well-placed whisper, one nudge, and the whole thing would unravel. I started compiling screenshots and gathering links. The pieces were falling into place. I didn't feel triumph. I felt justified. I had given them everything: time, money, my quiet, loyal devotion. And they looked me in the face and told me I was nothing. That night I sat alone again, the lamp flickering gently as the wind picked up outside. I opened a fresh document on my laptop and typed one sentence: they think I won't fight back. I saved it under the name Restoration. Because that's what this was. Not revenge, not destruction. Restoration. Of dignity, of truth, of everything they thought they could erase. The house was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Each tick was a countdown now. Not toward old age or regret, but toward something I hadn't felt in years: purpose. Have you ever rebuilt your life not out of spite, but because someone pushed you too far? If so, how did you start? I sat in a corner booth at a rundown cafe 2 blocks from my house, the kind of place where no one bothers to ask questions, and the coffee tastes like it's been burning since sunrise. It was quiet, which suited me fine. My laptop sat open in front of me, a secure VPN masking every move I made online. On the table next to it lay the folder I'd prepared copies of the offshore loan agreement, the financial discrepancies, and a trade journal article highlighting Trevor's poor leadership and questionable ethics. I wasn't looking to humiliate him in public. Not yet. But I knew someone who wouldn't need much of a push to start unraveling things: one of his primary investors. Hargrove, a shark in a suit. The kind of man who cut losses fast and didn't care who bled in the process. I drafted the email slowly, carefully. No emotion, no signature, just facts. The subject line was simple: concerns about your investment. I attached the documents, made sure the metadata was clean, and hovered over the send button for a long moment. I thought about Trevor's toast again, his smug grin, the way he dismissed my entire existence in one sentence. I thought about Lindsay sipping her wine like my humiliation was vintage and worth savoring. Then I clicked. The email vanished into the ether. Quiet, precise. No fireworks. Just a blade slipping between the ribs. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Trevor's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring twice before I answered. What I said, my voice flat. "You bastard," he hissed. "You sent that email, didn't you?" Hargrave just pulled out. My deal's tanking. I leaned back in the booth, the vinyl creaking beneath me. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said slowly. "Sounds like your mess caught up with you." "Don't play dumb," he snapped. In the background, I heard glass shatter, maybe a bottle thrown, maybe his composure breaking. "You're trying to ruin me." "No, Trevor," I said evenly. "You're doing that yourself." Then I hung up. I stared out the window for a long moment, watching a man in a gray hoodie walk his dog past the laundromat. My pulse was steady. My coffee had gone cold. I opened my inbox again. There was a reply from Hargrove's assistant. "Mr. Hargrove is reviewing the materials and has paused all commitments." That was all I needed. The domino had fallen. Trevor's world was beginning to collapse, not because I made it, but because I stopped holding it up. Back home, I updated my notebook. Step 1 complete. Step 2 was already forming. Lindsay had built her empire on image, but that image had cracks. All it would take was one whisper in the right ear. I thought again about the night of my birthday, the humiliation, the applause that never came. Then I smiled, not from spite, but from relief. They thought I was weak. But what they never understood was this: quiet men aren't empty. We're full of storms. Have you ever realized your silence is your strength? When did you decide it was time to speak without raising your voice? The day after I pulled the first thread, I found myself back at the library, the one a few neighborhoods over where no one knew my name, and the walls still smelled faintly of old paper and floor wax. I sat in a corner reading room with my laptop open and a stack of business journals beside me. I hadn't felt this alert in years. It was like waking up a part of myself I thought I'd buried, along with my old job title. Trevor's name lit up the search results. His company's filings past funding rounds, timelines that didn't quite match, and legal notices tucked in between press releases, like mold hidden behind fresh paint. One article stood out. It detailed a short-term loan he'd taken from a private lender with offshore ties terms that bordered on predatory. High-interest, aggressive default clauses, and no regulatory protection. Worse, it looked like he'd doctored numbers in his investor brief to hide it. It was reckless. It was dangerous. And it was gold. I printed it, slid it into the folder, and added a sticky note with a simple word: leverage. Later that evening, I called Jack again. His voice came through low and scratchy, like he was somewhere crowded. "Frank, you're getting obsessed," he said, half joking. "What now? That offshore loan Trevor took," I said. "The terms. Who else has seen them?" He was quiet for a beat. Then, "Only the lender and maybe one silent partner." "Why?" "Because I've got a copy. And I know he's missed payments." Jack exhaled slowly. "Then it's worse than I thought. I've heard whispers. An ethics probe might be coming down. Someone flagged inconsistencies in his last report." I didn't flinch. "Good." "You sure you want to keep going down this road?" he asked, not as a warning, but as a friend who knew I'd already decided. "I'm sure," I said. I hung up and turned back to my notes. Every line, every bullet point was beginning to line up like rows of falling dominoes. The trick wasn't to destroy him. It was to let his own missteps do the job. All I had to do was let the right people see what I saw. That evening, as the sky turned orange outside my window, I felt something I hadn't in years control. Not in a cruel way. Not out of ego. But quiet control, the kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. Trevor had always thought of me as the man in the background, the one who wrote checks, nodded quietly, and stayed out of the way. But now I was moving pieces, and he didn't even realize it. I looked down at my notebook again. On the last line of the page, I wrote in bold letters, "Let them expose themselves." It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about correction, about balance, about reminding them that silence is not weakness, and decency is not the same as blindness. Have you ever reached a point where protecting your peace meant walking straight through the fire? What pushed you to finally light that match? It was nearly 3 in the afternoon when I stepped out of the library, the manila folder tucked under my arm like a quiet weapon. The wind had picked up, rattling the glass doors behind me, as if the building itself knew what I was about to do. I walked 2 blocks to a small cafe, the kind with wobbly tables and the smell of burnt coffee baked into the walls. I slid into the corner booth, opened my laptop, and connected through a secured line. It was time to deal with Lindsay. Trevor may have been the architect of his downfall, but Lindsay had done plenty of damage on her own. She built her life around curated posts and filtered perfection. Her Instagram was a shrine to fake elegance, lavish vacations, luxury handbags, scripted captions about gratitude and grind culture. I wasn't impressed. I'd spent decades building wealth through actual work, early mornings, late nights, honest math. Not hashtags. But I didn't need to argue with her. All I needed was a crack in her image. It didn't take long. I followed the trail of whispers, former sponsors distancing themselves. Quietly, collaborations dropped without explanation, and a handful of anonymous comments accusing her of inflating her follower count. That was all I needed. I composed a message to a blogger named K Sharp, competitive, and most importantly, someone Lindsay had publicly clashed with. They had history. I remembered seeing the passive-aggressive jabs in stories and sub-tweets. Kay had a reputation for exposing the curated lies of influencers who built brands on borrowed time. She'd know exactly what to do with what I was about to send. The email was anonymous. I stripped every digital fingerprint from it before attaching the audio clip, the one I'd recorded, when Trevor and Lindsay came storming into my house, shouting threats and insults. The sound quality was clean. Her voice, cold and dismissive, came through with chilling clarity. "You're pathetic, Frank. You're no father. You're useless." I didn't need to say a word. Her own voice would dismantle her. I hovered over the send button for a moment. Not because I doubted myself, but because I understood the weight of what I was doing. I wasn't just removing a mask. I was exposing everything they thought they could hide. Then I clicked. The message disappeared, swallowed by the digital current. I sat back and let the cafe noise drift around me. The hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of a spoon on ceramic, the soft murmur of other conversations. I imagined Lindsay scrolling through her phone, seeing the numbers drop, watching the brand deals vanish one by one, not because someone attacked her, but because the truth had finally walked into the room. I closed my laptop and slipped the folder back into my coat. Outside, the wind had calmed, but the storm I'd started was just beginning. Have you ever exposed someone who lived behind a mask for too long? Did it feel like justice, or did it feel like the end of something you should have ended long ago? It didn't take long. Less than 12 hours after I sent the recording, Kay posted it. A clipped segment, just enough. Lindsay's voice, dripping with contempt, echoed across social media like wildfire. "You're pathetic, Frank. You're no father. You're useless." It was played over a montage of her branded content, her smiling in sponsored skincare ads, posing with detox teas, standing barefoot in a beige kitchen, talking about authenticity. The contrast was brutal. The comments section exploded. Fans turned. Sponsors fled. Her profile turned from polished influence to radioactive cautionary tale in less than a day. I watched it all unfold from my living room, sitting in the same chair where they had once stood, accusing me, mocking me. Now their words were proof. Evidence. I didn't need to respond. The world did it for me. Hashtags like Nakratcher and Fake Family and Behind the Brand started trending. Brand names released public statements distancing themselves from her. One even mentioned audio concerns directly. Her curated world collapsed, not with a bang, but with a whisper and a few well-placed truths. I didn't smile. I just sat still, my hands folded, letting the silence wrap around me like a coat finally zipped. That evening, the knock on my door was sharp, 3 quick hits, too hard to be polite. I knew it was them. I'd been waiting. I slid the recorder into my pocket again, pressed the red button, and opened the door. Trevor stood there, soaked from the rain hair, dripping shirt, clinging to him like regret. Lindsay was behind him, her heels clicking against the wooden porch, mascara smudged beneath her eyes. She smelled of perfume too much, too sharp, like she was trying to cover up fear. "You've gone too far," Trevor said, pushing past me without waiting for permission. "We need to talk." I let the door shut behind them. The living room was dim, the only light coming from a side lamp that cast long shadows across the floor. "Sit," I said. They didn't. Trevor began pacing, wet shoes squeaking on the floorboards. Lindsay stood stiff, her arms folded across her chest. "You tanked my deal," Trevor said, voice low and shaky. "Hargrove's out. The bank's calling in the loan. You need to fix this." I raised an eyebrow, arms crossed. "You called me worthless." Remember, Lindsay stepped forward. Her voice softened like she was trying to slide into reason. "Frank, we're family. You don't want to destroy Trevor's future over one bad night." I looked at her long and hard. "Family doesn't humiliate each other in front of strangers," I said. "Family doesn't laugh while someone is being torn apart." Trevor slammed his hand against the wall, a loud thud that shook a frame loose. "Enough games. Either give me the money or I'll make sure everyone knows what a bitter, selfish old man you are." My hand slipped into my pocket, feeling the smooth plastic of the recorder still running. "You're not getting a dime," I said. "You made your choices. Have you ever stood in your own home and realized the people you once protected are now the ones you must protect yourself from? What did you do when the mask finally came off?" Trevor's chest heaved like a cornered animal, his face, red eyes, wild. Lindsay's posture was cracking now, too. Shoulders stiff, lips pressed into a tight line, her eyes scanning the room, not with confidence but calculation. She clutched her purse like it was a shield, but the shaking in her fingers gave her away. "Frank," she said, her voice sharper this time, "you're hoarding money while we're drowning. That's not what family does. You're supposed to help us." I didn't respond right away. I walked to the side table, picked up a glass of water, and took a slow sip. I wanted them to feel the weight. I wanted them to sit in the mess they made. "You came into my house, insulted me, humiliated me, then tried to threaten me into silence," I said, voice low and even. "Now you want to talk about what family is supposed to do." Trevor's jaw clenched. "This isn't over," he said. "I swear, if you don't help us, you'll what I asked. Ruin me, you already tried. And you did it in front of a room full of strangers." I stepped closer. But here's the difference now, Trevor. I'm not standing still anymore. Lindsay tugged at his sleeve. Let's go. He's done. He doesn't care about us. He never did. She shot me a final glare, one that was meant to be intimidating. It wasn't. They turned and stormed out, Trevor muttering curses under his breath as the door slammed shut behind them. The echo vibrated through the house, but I felt no tremble. I stood still in the quiet, the soft ticking of the old clock on the mantel keeping me grounded. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the recorder, and pressed stop. The red light blinked off. Then I walked back to my desk, sat down, and played it back. Their voices came through crystal clear threats, insults, desperation. It was all there, and it wasn't emotion. It was evidence. That night, I drove across town to Richard's law office. Old friend, former colleague, trustworthy. His space was cramped, lit by buzzing fluorescents and warmed by the scent of old books and dust. I slid the USB across his desk and waited while he plugged it in. We sat in silence as the audio played, both of us listening with the kind of stillness that only comes from experience. When it ended, he leaned back and let out a long breath. "Frank," he said, "this is dynamite, but it's dangerous too. You sure about this?" "They crossed the line," I said. "I'm not playing games anymore. I'm settling a score." He nodded and started scribbling notes. "No fingerprints," he muttered. "No direct trail, anonymous leaks, third parties. We'll do it clean." I stayed quiet, watching him. He looked up. "What's your end game?" I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know, but because it wasn't about a finish line. It was about restoring what they tried to erase. "They thought I was weak," I said finally. "Now they'll see just how wrong they were." Have you ever reached a moment when protecting your peace meant outsmarting the very people you once raised? Did it make you feel guilty or free? 2 days later, the morning paper landed on my doorstep like any other, except this time the headline carried my son's name in bold. Local entrepreneur faces financial ruin amid investor exodus. His photo, slightly out of focus, showed him ducking behind a folder, his mouth tight, his body language unraveling. I set my coffee down and stared at the grainy image for a long time. Not with satisfaction, not with anger, with silence. The kind of silence that comes when you realize justice doesn't always need applause. It just needs to arrive. I folded the paper neatly and placed it beside my notebook. The envelope I'd sent to Trevor's creditors had done its work. A tip supported by public records and quiet nudges. Nothing illegal. Just enough to raise eyebrows. Just enough to freeze accounts. And now the floodgates had opened. Contracts canceled. Clients walked. His accounts locked. I didn't need to guess. I knew the look in his eyes from that photo. It was the same look I'd seen on the faces of men whose mistakes finally caught up with them. Later that afternoon, Jack called. His voice was lower than usual, not somber, but serious. "It's a bloodbath, Frank. I talked to a guy at the bank. Trevor's office is a ghost town. Phone's off the hook. His staff left. Word is creditors are circling hard." "And Lindsay?" I asked. "Cracking," he said. "Heard them fighting in public last night. She was yelling about her brand being dragged down, called him a fraud. She's panicking." He chuckled darkly. "You've shaken the whole tree." I thanked him and hung up. Then I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. I thought about Trevor when he was 25, ambitious, bright-eyed, telling me he was going to build something bigger than I ever had. I believed him. I wanted to. I wrote checks. I offered advice he never took. I bailed him out when his first company tanked. And he told me I didn't understand tech, like experience and caution were weaknesses. I was cautious. I was quiet. But I never lost. That was the difference. I reopened my laptop and scrolled through social media. His name was everywhere now. Former partners tagging him in angry posts. Investors demanding answers. A few memes cruel viral. One showed his face superimposed on a sinking ship. Another captioned, "From Forbes to for sale." I didn't laugh. I didn't feel pity either. I just took a deep breath and let the weight settle where it belonged on his shoulders, not mine. Across the room, the old clock on the mantel ticked steadily. The same one Ellen picked out 30 years ago. It had seen birthdays, arguments, quiet Sunday mornings, and now it was marking the unraveling of a man I once hoped would carry my name with honor. Instead, he carried it into the mud. But now the mud was his alone to clean. Have you ever watched someone you love fall apart from wounds they gave themselves? Did it break your heart, or finally set you free? While Trevor's empire burned in public, Lindsay's fall was happening behind the glass of a phone screen. I watched from my desk as her Instagram page shifted by the Our brand logos vanishing from her bio collaborations, erased like they never happened. A desperate video appeared sometime around noon. She sat in her kitchen, a familiar beige backdrop, face bare and voice trembling. "This is a misunderstanding," she said, blinking too often, mascara smudged beneath her eyes. "I'm not that person. Please don't believe the lies." But the comments said otherwise. "You called your own father-in-law useless," one wrote. "Authenticity." "You faked everything," said another. The tide had turned, and it was ruthless. I closed the laptop gently and stood walking to the kitchen for another cup of coffee. My hands were steady. The house was quiet, but not heavy like before. It was calm, purposeful. I didn't relish her collapse, but I didn't stop it either. She had built her image on the illusion of warmth, the false glow of borrowed values. Now stripped of filters and publicists, the truth showed, and it was cold. Jack called again just after lunch. His voice carried a hint of satisfaction this time. "She's done, Frank. Sponsors dropped her this morning. One of them even reposted the recording, said it doesn't align with their core values. She's toxic now. No invites. No deals. A brand manager's worst nightmare." "And Trevor?" I asked. "Still spiraling. Nobody's picking up his calls. I heard he even tried reaching out to Hargrove again, but it's dead. It's over." There was a pause. "You playing a hell of a game." "No game," I said, "just consequences." After I hung up, I went outside and sat on the front steps. The sky was a clear blue, the kind that made everything feel sharper. I watched a neighborhood kid ride by on a bike, streamers flapping from the handlebars. He waved. I waved back. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at me like that, without pity or judgment, just a person sitting in the sun. I took a breath. The air smelled like summer dust and pine. It smelled like clarity. Inside, the news was still unfolding. A local media blog picked up the influencer story, Chicago social star canceled after leaked audio. I clicked on it once, scanned the article, and then closed it without reading the comments. I didn't need affirmation. The truth had spoken. It didn't shout. It didn't scream. It whispered with precision, and the world listened. I walked back into the house, every step measured. The living room hadn't changed, but it felt different now. Less like a place I was trapped in, more like a space I'd reclaimed. Lindsay had laughed at me once in this room. I remembered it clearly. She'd called me invisible. She was wrong. I'd never been invisible. I'd been watching, listening, remembering. And now I was being heard in ways she never saw coming. Have you ever been dismissed by someone who thought you'd never matter? How did you respond when the time came to prove them wrong? Later that evening, I returned from the grocery store and found a plain white envelope tucked into the corner of my mailbox. No stamps, no return address, just my name written in handwriting I hadn't seen in years, but knew instantly. Trevor's. I brought it inside and placed it on the kitchen table. It sat there for an hour before I finally opened it. The paper inside was folded 3 times, the creases shaky, the ink uneven. The words were all over the place, apologies tangled with excuses, guilt buried beneath desperation. Dad, I know I messed up. I've lost everything. Please meet with me. I can fix this. I just need one more chance. I read it twice, then I read it a 3rd time. I could almost hear his voice saying the words, but the part that struck me wasn't what he wrote, it was what he didn't. No mention of that night at the restaurant, no acknowledgement of what he said about my life, just a vague, pleading tone, like a man asking to borrow the same ladder he'd once kicked out from under me. I folded the letter again, tighter this time. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there listening to the clock ticking above the stove. That weekend, I visited Emily's memorial garden. It's quiet there just past the church where we'd spent so many Sunday mornings. A stone bench beneath the tree we planted in her honor. Her name carved clean and simple into granite the way she would have liked it. I sat down with the envelope still in my coat pocket. The sun was just beginning to dip, casting long golden shadows across the grass. I pulled out the letter one last time, my fingers pressing into the folds, and whispered, "You'd have hated this, Em. You'd have told me to forgive. But you'd also understand why I can't." I struck a match and held the edge of the paper over the flame. It caught quickly, curling at the corners, ink disappearing line by line until it was nothing but ash, drifting across the bench and onto the grass. I watched it fall, not with anger, but with peace. That letter wasn't an apology. It was a lifeline thrown too late. And I had spent too many years being the safety net for people who never looked down until they fell. As the sky turned pink and purple, I stood and placed my hand on the cool surface of Emily's stone. "I did it, Em," I whispered. "They can't reach me now." And I meant it. That night I went home and sat at my desk with the window open. The breeze moved through the house like something being let go. I opened my laptop and searched flights to Rome. We had planned to go years ago before life got in the way. Now I would go for both of us. The thought didn't make me sad. It made me feel something else, light. Have you ever chosen to move forward by letting go of what hurt you? What did it feel like to finally stop waiting for an apology that was never coming? The next morning I made the call. A quiet voice answered after 2 rings. "Hello, this is Sandra at Coastal Horizons Travel." I took a breath. "1 ticket to Rome," I said. "Next month, open return, no tours, just airfare and hotel for the first 3 nights." She paused. "Of course." "May I ask if this is for business or leisure?" I smiled slightly. "It's for closure." I barely heard her soft laugh before she resumed typing. I didn't care about the flight details, the seating preferences, or the brochure suggestions. My mind was already there on cobblestone streets, sunlight through cathedrals and quiet cafes where no one knew my name. After I hung up, I returned to the study. My desk was as I left it, the notebook open, a pen laid across it, the pages full of dates, moves, consequences. I read through each line again, not for revision, but for recognition. I had done what I set out to do, not just to correct the disrespect, but to reclaim the narrative of my life. Trevor had tried to rewrite it to reduce me to a man defined by silence and self-sacrifice. But the truth was always deeper, always stronger. I closed the notebook and placed it gently in the drawer. It didn't need to stay out anymore. I wasn't planning another step. I wasn't watching for another misstep. I was done. What remained was not bitterness, but distance. a necessary and earned separation. They had fallen. I hadn't pushed them. I'd only stopped holding the ladder. That afternoon, I took a slow walk through the park. It was the same one I used to take Trevor to when he was little. I passed the old swing set where he once begged me to push him higher, laughing until his tiny shoes kicked at the clouds. I paused at the bench where Emily and I used to sit with coffee cups and too many quiet dreams. I stood there a long time listening to the wind filter through the trees, the same way it did back then. The years folded in on themselves in that moment, and I realized something. This wasn't a story of revenge. It was a story of return to self, to peace, to the man I'd been before everyone else's needs drowned him out. Back home, I pulled out a photo of Emily from the drawer. She was standing in front of a lake wind in her hair, wearing a sweater I still kept tucked away in a box I hadn't opened in years. I placed the photo on the desk next to my passport. "We're finally going," I whispered. "No more postponing," and I meant it. Have you ever made a decision not to run from your past, but to walk calmly beyond it? What part of yourself did you reclaim when you stopped waiting for others to change? The day of the ceremony arrived with little fanfare. No parade, no reporters, no dramatic speeches. Just a small crowd gathered on the lawn of the community center beneath a bright blue sky, the kind that makes everything feel like it's finally beginning again. Balloons bobbed gently in the wind, and a bronze plaque glinted in the sunlight behind the podium. It read, "The Emily Greenwood Foundation for Families Who Need a Hand Up." It was simple, honest, just like her. I stood at the podium, a microphone in my hand, the gentle hum of anticipation in the air. Neighbors filled the folding chairs, a few former colleagues in the back, and a handful of strangers I didn't recognize. That was fine. This wasn't about legacy. It was about intention. I cleared my throat. "Thank you all for coming." I began, my voice steady. "This foundation is about second chances. It's about dignity. It's about lifting others the way we all wish someone had lifted us." I paused, letting the words settle. It's Emily's dream, and today it's real. Applause rose softly, warm and respectful. I scanned the crowd, not looking for Trevor or Lindsay. I knew they wouldn't come. I didn't want them to. This space wasn't for them. It was for the young mother in the front row holding a toddler on her lap, her eyes wide with hope. It was for the teenage boy beside her, clutching a letter of acceptance from a college neither of his parents had attended. It was for the people who had been overlooked, underestimated, and forgotten. People like I had once been. As the event wound down, I stood near the plaque, shaking hands, receiving kind words I didn't need but appreciated. A woman with soft eyes and a nervous smile approached me. "Thank you," she said, holding out an envelope. "My son just got his scholarship letter. This changes everything." I nodded, not trusting my voice just then. She didn't need a speech from me. She just needed to know someone saw her. That was enough. Later, I stood near the edge of the lawn alone for a moment, letting the noise of the gathering fade behind me. Paul, the wiry event organizer, leaned in and spoke quietly. "Heard your son's in rough shape," he said. "Word is they skipped town. No one knows where they went." I looked out across the grass hands in my pockets. "That's his story now," I said evenly. "Not mine." Paul nodded, understanding enough to leave it there. By the time I walked to my car, the sun was warm on my back. I opened the door, but before getting in, I checked the mailbox outside the center. A single envelope sat waiting. My name written in Trevor's hand. I turned it over once, then again, before slipping it into my coat pocket. I didn't open it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Have you ever realized that peace doesn't come from reconciliation, but from releasing the hope for it? What did you choose to walk away from so you could finally walk forward? The room fell quiet as I stepped to the podium, though the space wasn't nearly as full as the foundation launch weeks earlier. This was smaller, more intentional. A local community group had invited me to speak about legacy and quiet resilience. I wasn't sure why I said yes, but standing there now, looking at the folding chairs filled with worn faces and kind eyes, I realized this moment mattered. Not for ego, for closure. I adjusted the mic and looked down at the small index card I'd brought with me. Then I folded it and put it in my pocket. I didn't need it. I'm not here to talk about success, I began, and I'm not here to talk about revenge. A few heads tilted. I'm here to talk about worth. The kind of worth that doesn't show up in bank accounts or applause, but in the quiet way you carry yourself when no one's watching. In the moments you hold the door open for someone who won't thank you. In the years you give to people who never look back. I paused. Some people will never see your value. That doesn't make it disappear. It only makes them blind. I didn't mention Trevor by name. I didn't have to. The silence in the room told me they understood. For years, I continued, I thought I had to wait for someone to say I mattered. A son, a friend, a stranger in a suit. But the truth is, I only had to believe it myself. That was the hardest part, believing I was enough even when the people I loved most made me feel invisible. A man in the second row nodded slowly, his hands clasped like a prayer. A woman dabbed her eyes. I didn't speak louder. I didn't gesture. I just stood there and told the truth. We talk so much about forgiveness, about mending things, I said. But sometimes healing isn't found in reunion. Sometimes healing comes from walking away with your dignity intact, from saying no more, and meaning it. My voice didn't shake. It hadn't in months. After the event, a small line formed. People came up to shake my hand. Some shared their own stories of children who stopped calling, of marriages that faded into silence, of friendships that ended with betrayal instead of closure. They didn't ask me how I fixed it. They just wanted to be heard. I listened. That was enough. When the chairs were folded and the lights dimmed, I walked out into the late afternoon sun. There was no news crew waiting, no applause, just the sound of birds overhead and a breeze moving through the trees. I felt light, not because everything was perfect, because everything was mine now, my choices, my boundaries, my peace. Have you ever discovered that you don't need someone else's approval to live a meaningful life? What changed the moment you decided to live it for yourself? The next morning, I returned to the foundation office to check on a few files. The building was small, just 2 rooms, and a shared kitchen, but it felt alive. The walls held bulletin boards filled with scholarship announcements, thank you letters from students, and pictures of families who'd received support. I stood in the hallway reading one of the notes. It was written in neat handwriting on lined notebook paper. Dear Mr. Greenwood, you don't know me, but your help gave my mom the chance to breathe. I'm the first in my family to go to college. Thank you for believing in someone you've never met. I folded the paper gently and placed it back in its slot. It wasn't the first letter like that, but it hit me differently that day. I walked into my office and sat down at the desk. A stack of envelopes waited ready for my signature. Approvals for this semester's recipients. I signed each one carefully, making sure the ink didn't smudge. These kids weren't just numbers. They were chances, fresh ones. Something Trevor had been given time and time again, but never held on to. Around noon, a young mother came in holding her son by the hand. He couldn't have been older than 7. She looked nervous, unsure if she was allowed to step beyond the front door. I smiled and waved them in. It's okay. Come on. She hesitated, then approached the desk. I just wanted to thank you, she said softly. My daughter got a letter. The one with the scholarship. We didn't think she had a shot. I nodded, not wanting to interrupt. She does now, I said. And it's hers. No strings. Her boy climbed up into the chair beside her legs, swinging. He looked around the office, wide-eyed, as if trying to understand the importance of the moment. You help people like us, he asked. His voice was small, but curious. I try to, I said. He stared at me a second longer, then smiled. Not the kind of polite smile adults give to be polite, but genuine, uncomplicated joy. That smile stayed with me the rest of the day. Later, after they left, I stepped outside and walked the perimeter of the building. The lawn needed mowing. The benches could use fresh paint. Nothing fancy, but something worth keeping. I thought back to a time when Trevor was around that same age, when I'd promised myself I'd give him the world if I could. And in many ways, I did. But some people don't know what to do with gifts that aren't wrapped in praise. As the breeze moved through the trees, I sat on one of those benches and pulled out my phone. I looked again at Trevor's unopened letter, still sitting in my messages now as a scanned photo after the physical copy remained unread in my drawer. I thought about opening it, but then I thought about that little boy's smile, and I let the phone fall gently back into my pocket. Have you ever realized that the people who appreciate you most are the ones who never expected anything from you? What did that shift in perspective teach you about love and legacy? I heard the rumor 3 days later, not from Jack or anyone official, but from a grocery clerk, with a kind heart and a loose tongue. You hear about your son, she asked, scanning my items slowly. Someone said he left town, just packed up and disappeared. Him and his wife? I didn't react. I nodded once, offered a polite smile, and took my bag. Outside, I sat in the car for a moment, letting the engine hum beneath me. I wasn't surprised. Not really. The silence had been growing louder for weeks. No angry calls, no threats, no desperate pleas. Just absence. Back home, I poured myself a glass of water and sat by the window. The street was calm. A kid rode past on a skateboard, followed by a golden retriever that clearly wasn't interested in keeping up. It felt peaceful in a way that was neither triumphant nor sad, just settled. There was no part of me that wanted to know where Trevor and Lindsay had gone. No curiosity, no regret. Their chapter in my story was done, not erased, but closed. That evening, I made tea and sat down at my desk to write a letter. Not to Trevor, to myself. A habit Emily had once encouraged. Write it all down, she used to say. That way your heart won't forget what your mind tries to move past. I took her advice more now than I ever did when she was alive. Maybe that's the strange part of grief, how we finally start listening when there's no one left to hear it. Dear Frank, I began, you did the hard thing. You let go of the people who refused to see you, and you held on to the person you'd forgotten yourself. You weren't cruel. You were clear. You weren't weak. You were silent until it counted. And now you're not waiting anymore. You're living. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. It was enough just to say it out loud on the page. The next morning, I took that letter, folded it neatly, and placed it inside the drawer with the old family photo albums. I didn't open those albums anymore. Not out of bitterness, but because I no longer needed proof of who I was. I no longer needed Trevor to call me dad to know I had been one. I no longer needed apologies to know I had been wronged. That afternoon, I walked the path behind the house, the one that curved through the woods and opened near a quiet stream. Emily and I used to walk it in the fall, our hands brushing as leaves crackled beneath our boots. I stopped at our favorite spot, an old tree stump we once used as a makeshift bench, and sat for a while. I didn't think about Trevor. I didn't think about Lindsay. I thought about peace. and how sometimes it doesn't roar in like a storm. It arrives like this soft, earned, and long overdue. Have you ever reached a place in life where silence no longer felt empty, but full? What did that silence give back to you that noise never could? A few days later, I visited the cemetery where Emily's stone stood beneath a tall oak tree, its leaves rustling gently like they were whispering secrets only the quiet could hear. I hadn't been there in a while, not because I'd forgotten, but because I'd finally stopped needing her permission to move forward. Still, that place always held a kind of gravity, as if time itself slowed near her name. I brought fresh flowers, white lilies, the kind she used to place on the windowsill of our old kitchen, just because they made the room feel honest. I knelt beside the marker and laid the bouquet down, brushing a few stray leaves from the base. "I'm going," I said softly. "Rome." I booked the flight. The words hung in the air like smoke from a candle just snuffed out. "It won't be the same without you. I know that. But I think you'd be proud I'm going anyway." I let the silence answer. She always had a way of letting quiet mean more than words ever could. I sat on the bench nearby, the sun dipping behind the clouds, casting long shadows across the grass. I pulled out the envelope again, Trevor's letter. I hadn't opened it. I'd carried it around for weeks, waiting for the right moment. But now, as I sat just feet away from the only person who had ever seen me completely, I understood something. There wouldn't be a right moment. Because the past, no matter how sincere or desperate, couldn't undo what had already been lived. I struck a match and held it to the edge of the envelope. The flame caught quickly, curling the paper, darkening the ink, before turning it to ash that danced across the stone and disappeared with the wind. I didn't watch it burn out of anger. I watched it with release. That letter wasn't redemption. It was a final grasp at control. And I wasn't anyone's last resort anymore. The light shifted as I stood, a soft gold stretching across the horizon. I touched Emily's name carved into the stone, my fingers resting there for a moment longer than usual. "I did it, Em," I whispered. "I didn't let them take me with them." Then I smiled just enough to feel it. Not because everything was better, but because everything was mine again. On the way back home, I stopped by the travel agency to confirm my itinerary. The woman behind the desk recognized me and smiled. "You're going alone?" she asked gently. I nodded. "But not lonely," I said. "There's a difference." That night, I sat on the porch with a blanket draped over my shoulders, watching the stars blink one by one into view. No TV, no phone, just the sound of crickets and the breeze. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't hoping someone would come find me. I was already found. Have you ever stopped chasing closure and realized that peace had been waiting for you to choose it? What changed the moment you decided to stop waiting for the people who never looked back? The plane ticket sat tucked inside my passport, neatly folded, with the itinerary printed in bold letters: Rome. Departure. Wednesday, 9:40 a.m. Just seeing it on the kitchen counter each morning made something stir inside me, not nerves, not doubt. Anticipation. The quiet kind that builds not from impulse but from a long, patient ache, finally answered. I'd packed lightly. Just to carry on, a weathered journal and one photo of Emily taken by the sea the last time we ever traveled together. She wore that blue scarf she always claimed made her feel less serious. I planned to bring it with me. On the final evening before the flight, I visited the foundation one last time. I signed off on a few documents, locked the office door, and left a note for the new program coordinator. "Do it with care," I wrote. "Not just strategy. Heart." The building didn't need my presence anymore. It had its own momentum, now built not on revenge but restoration. That thought made me smile as I stepped out into the early evening light. At home, I brewed a final cup of tea, and walked to the porch, sitting in the same old chair I'd nearly thrown out a dozen times. Across the street, porch lights flickered on one by one as the neighborhood settled into its nightly rhythm. The envelope Trevor had given me remained unread in my drawer, and I had no desire to open it. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply done carrying the weight of someone else's apology. I thought back to all the years I'd measured my worth through what I could give: money, forgiveness, silence. Trevor and Lindsay had been storms in my life, but not the kind that leave destruction. More like erosion, subtle daily, the slow undoing of who I used to be. And yet here I was, whole again. Not because they returned anything, but because I reclaimed it, piece by piece. When I finally turned out the porch light, I stood quietly in the hallway, eyes on the old framed photograph of Emily and me from our wedding day. She'd hated that picture. Said her hair looked wrong, and the lighting made her look tired. But I'd always loved it because it was real. She looked like home. "I'm leaving tomorrow," I said softly. "And I think you'd like who I've become." No one answered, of course. But sometimes the absence of sound is all the confirmation you need. As I went to bed, I didn't run through a list of what had been lost. I thought of what had been protected: my integrity, my peace, the quiet kind of legacy no scandal could touch. And in the morning, I would board a plane, not as a man running from anything, but as one finally returning to himself. Have you ever started a new chapter in life and realized it was never too late to become who you were meant to be? What did it take for you to choose that path with both hands? If there's one thing I've learned, it's that peace doesn't always arrive with forgiveness. It often walks in after you've chosen to stop explaining your worth. Some of us spend a lifetime waiting for the people we love to become who we hoped they'd be. But sometimes the most honest love is the one we give to ourselves, when we finally stop begging for it from others. If you're a parent, ask yourself, are you giving your children love or permission to walk over your silence? Have you ever lived through something like this? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments. If this meant something to you, subscribe and pass it on. Sometimes letting go is the greatest victory of all. Thank you for listening.